Hello, it's Martin from Wisely Automotive, and as you can see, I am sitting in a Jaguar I-PACE in my casual clothes. Why is that? Well, I'm taking it on a little road trip up to Scotland, and by little I mean up to Glasgow today and then to Inverness and back later in the week, so about a 1,000-mile round trip. Besides the i3s and the Teslas, we do sell I-PACEs and Audi e-trons. But truth to be told, we have the least experience with the I-PACE out of all of the cars I just named. So I thought this would be a great opportunity to learn more about it. But enough talking, already used the car a bit and have not picked it up fully charged from the office. So I'm at about 76%, projected 177 miles of range. If I look at ZapMap, because I'm this far west, I think it will be best to go up to Glasgow on the M40 and then on the M6 round Birmingham. I will try to get all the way to Warwick. It's only about 87 miles, so shouldn't really be a problem even at proper motorway speeds with the heating on. And we will see how the car behaves and I will adjust the trip based on that. I was planning to use Apple CarPlay. As you can see, I have the cable ready for the phone. No wireless CarPlay in these previous generation head units from Jaguar. But when I put a destination into the built-in sat-nav, I realized that it does calculate predicted state of charge on arrival, which in this case will be a good thing. And it also means that I get the full map preview in the instrument cluster. So I will give it a shot, I will see how I get on. And if it's not the best, I will just switch to Google Maps or Apple Maps on my phone. So the postcode is, this looks about right, 41% estimated on arrival, so easily doable. Start the guidance. Okay, now recalculated 10% on arrival, so should be just about right. The last thing to do is to reset the trip computer so I can give you all the nerdy stats, and off we go. Arrived with 34%, which is much more realistic than what the car predicted at 10%. I don't know what quite happened there, because initially it suggested somewhere in the 40s region, which again sounds more plausible, but all good. I'm the only one charging, so can take my time and go all the way up to 90% depending on how long we take, and we'll get something to eat. I use the InstaVault app to start the charge instead of using contactless payment, just to see how I'm getting on in terms of the charging status, because I tried to add the I-PACE to the Jaguar Remote app, but Jaguar uses a very similar system to Porsche and Tesla, where you need to prove ownership using a scan of your V5, which, given it's a stock car, I don't have in our name. Despite very few people, the wait time for food was anything but short. However, that has a positive side as well. Car is at 85% at the moment. I did have a look at ZapMap, and there are a couple of options. First one is at Keel Services. Great option, because this looks like one of those newer GridServe installations where there are 8 rapid chargers, and these ones here are only 50 kilowatt units, whereas the GridServe ones in this case are up to 350 kilowatts. The grid connection doesn't always allow full power, but hopefully we will be able to see whether the Jag is capable of charging at 100 kilowatts, as it should with the latest software now. It is about 168 miles, almost 3 hours of driving, and the car is currently saying 208 miles on a charge. I think I will wait to 90%. It got busy since, so I will definitely not be staying for longer. In the meantime, let me get the charger into the sat-nav, and now it's estimating 17% on arrival, which sounds about right. So let's look at the trip computer. In the first trip I used about 36 kilowatt hours per 100 miles. These are very bizarre units, but in this case it should be fairly simple. I need to drive about 200 miles, so if I double that, it means I need about 72 kilowatt hours to complete the journey. The total battery capacity of the I-PACE is about 95 kilowatt hours. Obviously there is a bit of a buffer on top and bottom, so realistically it should be about 85 kilowatt hours usable. So at 90% it really should be fine. And either way, I can stop at any of the previous services if I realize that I'm running too low. I can keep the range prediction open to just keep an eye on it. And yeah, I'm at 90%, so good to go. Charging stop number 2. I arrived exactly with 20% left in the battery, definitely in part thanks to all the road works which are happening on the M6, where the speed is restricted to 50 miles per hour. The efficiency has been very consistent. It's pretty much still at about 35 to 36 kilowatt hour per 100 miles. I will work out what that is in all the other units, but for the size of the car, and considering it's about 12 degrees outside at the moment, that's pretty respectable in my opinion. So yeah, just after I plugged in, the charging power jumped to just over 90 kilowatts. Got a quick sandwich and started thinking about the next charging stops. The car is at 70%, 42 kilowatt hours delivered in 32.5 minutes. Still getting just a smidge over 50 kilowatts, but you can say that this is probably the biggest weakness of something like the I-PACE compared to the e-tron, which can just charge at 150 kilowatts all the way up to pretty much 80%. So to get to our accommodation, it's about 156 miles. So an 80% charge should get us there, even with the weather getting colder now and the heating being still set to about 21-22 degrees Celsius. And I do know that there is a ChargePlace Scotland AC unit at the destination, but I have stupidly forgotten my ChargePlace Scotland card back home, and given it's one of those older generation units, I'm not quite sure whether it will work through the ChargePlace Scotland app, even though if I go in, the app says that everything should work fine and it can see that the charger is available. After more Zapmap browsing, I decided the best solution will be to quickly top up just before Glasgow using one of the newer ChargePlace Scotland Swarco units, which I'm confident I will be able to start remotely through the app. In the meantime, the car is at over 85% state of charge, so it's about time to unplug and continue driving. Made it to Abington with 29% left, super comfortably. But the important bit is that I am charging. It seems like this unit is free, so I'm not going to complain about that. This used to be quite common for ChargePlace Scotland in the past, but now most of them are being transitioned to paid, and the prices differ based on which council you are looking at. There's also an old, what looks like to be decommissioned or soon to be decommissioned Rapid, and a dedicated dual-headed AC for long stays as well. At this point it's about 43 miles to our accommodation, and the car is at 43%, 92 miles. So what I will do is I will wait for the car to reach about 50%. That means that there is enough buffer to move around Glasgow in case I can't charge at the destination, and will be then ready to continue the trip tomorrow up towards Inverness. No idea what the predicted state of charge is, but don't really care. We are good to go. After I managed to put the connector back into the holder, that is. As expected, the charging station at the destination cannot be started through the app, so I moved the I-PACE to a regular parking spot for the night. Day 2 of the trip hence begins at a local Lidl car park, with the car connected to a 50 kW pot point station. And now I'm charging up to about 80% to get me all the way to Fort Augustus, still pulling 48 kilowatts at 65%, and I've only been here for about 12 minutes so far. You can see that the car predicts 1 hour to a full charge, but we will not listen to it. And in fact, this is something I described in the previous videos. So if you want to know more about road tripping in an EV in the UK and why I choose certain charging stations over others, I will leave that linked above in one of the corners in the card. I should mention I have a couple of friends with me, but they are a bit camera shy, so I don't know how many appearances they will make. We are down to 34 kilowatts of charging power, so definitely time to go. Yeah, stop charging. Beautiful. This is how quickly an app should work. It was pretty much instant. On the way north, I chose the more engaging route, going past the west side of Loch Lomond. Arrived at the Real Food Cafe, had some vegan haggis. The charger was available and I did try using the phone app to activate it, but as suspected that did not work. So I moved the car into proper parking space and that's it. It still has 61% left, so that should be plenty enough to get us to Fort William even if it gets a bit colder. I think the next stop will be Glencoe, where we will admire a bit of the nature. Then possibly Fort William and Fort Augustus, where we will top up for the rest of the journey on hopefully one of the Swarco units. On the motorways, the I-PACE has been amazingly comfortable, and had I not known, you could have easily told me even the base S-trim is riding on air suspension. It really just wafts along, sometimes taking a full couple of suspension cycles to settle down. That made me a bit concerned about how it will behave on twisty roads, but I'm happy to report that even without the adaptive dampers, it somehow manages to stay very flat and planted, being able to carry decent speed through the corners, even on broken road surfaces. We enjoyed the stunning views along the way, but parked up near Glencoe, and believe it or not, the scenery gets even better. A short hop over to a charger located by a hotel, with perfect timing letting us plug in just as a Hyundai Ioniq was leaving. We used the opportunity to take in the nature before the sun starts setting, enjoy some coffee, and I do my social media posts. The car already got to 97%, which is more than enough to get all the way to Inverness, so we get going again. I remember that about a year ago there were new ChargePlay Scotland units being put in Fort William, so I wanted to drive by to see them live. I'm sad to say they still have not been commissioned yet, despite everything looking ready. On a more positive note, just a bit further north we stopped by the Neptune's staircase. It's a set of 8 locks enabling boats to climb 19 meters over just quarter of a mile. Nice to see if you enjoy engineering. A couple of miles later we reach Fort Augustus with 77% in the battery, so I leave the rapid chargers for those who need it and plug into the slower AC Type 2 unit. If you have an EV, this is the way to charge on a road trip. Not when you get too low, but whenever there's an opportunity and the car is sat there doing nothing anyways. Fort Augustus is located on the southern edge of Loch Ness. No monster in sight, that would have probably made a much more interesting video, so we just take a couple of photos with the beautifully lit sky. The 40-minute charge added about 14 miles of range, so we continue around the western side of the loch towards our accommodation. The roads are now dark, and please appreciate this doesn't really come across well on video, but even the standard reflector LED headlights on this S trim level are totally fine, with decent spread, neutral color temperature and uniform brightness. No real adaptive functionality though, that's reserved for the higher trim levels with the projector units. Always be very careful when driving on these roads at night, as you may encounter wildlife and only have a fraction of a second to react. Day 3 of the road trip. I filmed a bit less towards the end of yesterday because I was trying to make up time to arrive at the Airbnb before midnight, which did indeed happen, and it's very good that I topped up because, as expected, there was no charging available at the site. It means that now the car is at about 75% charged, over 150 miles of range comfortably. What is really helping is the weather. It's quite rare, but this is the Scottish Highlands and it's 16 degrees Celsius and I'm only wearing a t-shirt. So we will take advantage of that and we will go for a quick hike. In terms of driving, today should be a lot quicker than yesterday because we only need to get from Lewiston, which is where we are now, to Inverness, and it's literally only 16 miles. So we've got plenty of range to explore the area, plenty of time, and as I said, hopefully the sun stays out. We park up by the Falls of Divach and go for a walk along the side of the mountain with many sheep in the surrounding fields and Loch Ness in the background. Back to the town centre and I don't even bother with the old charging station. We have some lunch and continue, now with Inverness within reach. Halfway up there's a beautiful beach on the northern tip of Loch Ness. Even without the raising air suspension, the ground clearance enables the I-PACE to go over rough roads. Now check out this rare footage of sunny Scottish Highlands. Got out of the parking space without any issue and not a moment of hesitation from the all-wheel drive system on the loose surface. Whilst still going slowly over the massive potholes, the quote-unquote small 18-inch wheels really are a more suitable option in the real world compared to some of the bigger options with very low-profile tires. By the way, this is why you need a powerful car. Not a gimmick to show off, but in a situation where you can't see very far down the road, I got up to 60 miles per hour without stress. Next stop, Inverness. Right after unloading our things, we go for a shop at Tesco's. The 50 kW rapid station is available, so I plug the car in. Started quickly through the app. The shop took about half an hour and the car got up to 80% in that time. This was quite a long day, so we just headed back and relaxed. Late start on day 4 and we drive back to the Urquhart castle. With the first structure being built in 1509, there's unfortunately not much left of it, but it was a nice opportunity to learn something about the history of the Highlands. We return back towards Inverness, but continue along the north coast to a town called Nairn. When you imagine north coast, you probably don't expect sandy beaches, but that's what's here. If the weather was nicer, I bet it would look like the southern end of the UK. We call for an early finish and stop at the same trusty Tesco to get more snacks. As you can see, we are definitely extremely well organized and could not have done that yesterday. A Model 3 just finished charging, so I take the space by the Rapid, but unlike the day before, I'm just getting constant errors. I checked and there is no water in the connector, and paying with contactless instead of the app makes no difference, so I move over to the AC unit, which works fine. Only gets us a couple of percent, but hey, can't complain about free charging. Day 5 is the last day in the Highlands. We wake up to some lovely gifts from the local seagull population on the I-PACE, so we need to quickly address that situation at a nearby car wash. Before doing so, I want to double check that the errors I experienced yesterday are not related to the car's DC charging system, but just a glitch on the station. To do so, I plug into the same style tritium unit, and it keeps working just fine. Next up, the jet wash. All clean and ready to continue the trip. For the journey back, we are following the A9, with the first stop being the Tomatin Whiskey Distillery to get some souvenirs. No time to waste though, and we join the A9 again. This was filmed shortly after Tesla opened some of their superchargers to third-party vehicles, so I will take advantage of that here in Aviemore. Note how I'm parked in a bay which is not designated for Teslas. This is because the I-PACE has the charging port on the wrong side compared to a Tesla, and parking this way means I'm not inconveniencing any Tesla drivers wanting to charge. Quick lunch with Iron Brew, and not quite sure what happened while we were gone, but the car is already at 100%. I unplug just before the overstay fees kick in, and with 244 miles should have plenty of range for the rest of the day. One coffee later, I thought it would be a great photo opportunity to get some pictures of the I-PACE in the centre of Scotland. There you go, proof that electric cars can be used outside of the city, even on long trips. It's a good opportunity to mention that the A9 is a lot easier and comfortable to drive on compared to the journey we took up to Inverness, and while not as engaging, the scenery is still stunning. The last attraction is the Pitlochry Dam. Other than the standard hydro power station side of things, this setup is unique because it features a so-called salmon ladder. Basically, just a series of interconnected reservoirs enabling fish to swim upstream past the power station itself. We drop off one of the two friends in Edinburgh and continue the journey back to Glasgow just after the sun has set. I have to make one more quick top up at Lidl. Despite having 65 miles of range, I'm in the same situation as on day 1 of the trip, where I need to have enough to move around Glasgow. Less than 10 minutes gets us to 35%, letting us finish the last leg of the day. The following days are spent around Glasgow. I went to see the expanded university campus, where of course all the fancy new buildings have opened after I finished my degree. One of the main objectives of the trip was to help move my friend's belongings from a storage facility down to London. This presented an excellent opportunity to test the practicality of the I-PACE. I'm glad to report that despite the aerodynamically shaped sloping roofline, everything fit and the parcel shelf didn't even need to come out. I mostly use the pot point at Lidl on Murray Hill to charge, but was very kindly given access to a 3-pin socket for the last night, so we could start the journey back to London with a decent chunk of range. The trip is almost over, it's the last day now, so we're about to depart from Glasgow. The car is about 85%, it's estimating just over 200 miles of range, but keep in mind I've been driving in the city most of the time. As usual, packing took quite a bit longer than expected and getting set up and everything, so now it's almost noon, so I will get started. From the past couple of days it seems best to assume about 2 miles per percent of state of charge. So at 80% I wouldn't want to go further than 160 miles. I had a very quick look at ZapMap and Killington Lake services seems like a good option. So if I look at Google Maps, that's about 146 miles. Can be pushing it a bit close, so if the range starts dropping soon, there is always the option to bail out at Penrith. Just off the motorway there are services as well, supplied by GridServe. Doesn't really make that much of a difference to stretch it in this case because both of those are the older GridServe units, so they will probably be software limited to 50 kilowatts anyways, so it doesn't matter whether we arrive with very low or just low state of charge. Oh, so I can click on this. Can I take over? Yes. Well, this changes the situation dramatically. With my impeccable planning, I arrived with about 13% left in the battery. What I did not account for is that it would be very, very busy. With these being one of the smaller services on the map, I thought not that many would use the chargers, and there are 2 units here, but there were 2 cars charging and 2 cars waiting when I arrived. Luckily, while we got the food, the chargers have freed up and I was able to plug in. I've done the math though, and for the first 12 minutes the average charging speed was only about 40 kilowatts. So I will be moving to a quicker side as soon as possible. Also, it really wasn't helped that the second unit was hogged by a VW ID4 charging all the way to 100%. I filtered 100 kilowatt plus charging points on ZapMap. There's one north of Preston, which is an Eon and only 2 units, so I don't know whether I would want to rely on that one. But further south of Preston, there is an MFG hub with 8 units. These do support contactless and are generally pretty reliable, and all of them should be able to output at least 150 kilowatts. So this looks like a good option. If I look at Google Maps, it's about 55 miles, and assuming I can do roughly 2 miles for 1% of charge, I can pretty much depart, because the car is now at 37% and 78 miles of range estimated. The sun is coming out, but it's quite windy still outside, so I do want to have a bit of a buffer. And I don't know how much of this you can see, but I've been plugged in for 35 minutes, so really enough is enough. Let's move to the next one. The second leg was very short, under about 50 miles, and as expected, when we rolled in, the car was about 17% plugged in and jumped straight to 100 kilowatts. Sustained that power for a while. Now it's at 75% and dropped down to 50 kilowatts. So if we look at ZapMap, I think the best thing to do will be to try to stretch it to Bunbury, to the InstaVolt hub. Again, InstaVolt, a very reliable network, and this one has 8 charging units. It got recently expanded. I actually haven't seen it in person yet. All supposedly supporting up to 150 kilowatts. It's about 140 miles. So going by our 2-to-1 rule, I need about 70% charge, and as I said, the car is currently at 76%, so I will try to go to 80 or maybe just over 80 to have a bit of a buffer, and then I'm ready to go. If the car ends up using more power than expected, I can always bail out at the same InstaVolt charger as on the way up to Glasgow. The last charging stop of the entire trip. I started chatting to an IX driver next to me and completely lost track of time, so I do not have a proper update from this location and I overcharged by a massive margin, but it was nice to be out of the car for a while. I arrived in the middle of London in the evening, so could cut through the congestion charge zone, but the trip is not over yet. Time for the complete summary. It has been many months since the trip. It took me a lot of time to edit the video. It was over half a terabyte of footage, so if you appreciate the effort, please hit the like button. However, I have compiled the total stats and I have them on my phone, so let's go through them now. The total distance covered over the 8 days was 1,355 miles, over a driving time of 32 hours and about 15 minutes, giving the average speed of 42 miles per hour. The efficiency was where you would expect it to be for a big, not relatively efficient EV with all-wheel drive and lots of power at about 2.8 miles per kilowatt hour, meaning the I-PACE needed 484 kilowatt hours to complete the entire distance. Those numbers can sound a bit abstract, so let's answer the usual questions: how long I needed to charge in total and how much did it cost. If we assume that I charged up on a typical home tariff these days, which is price guaranteed at 34p per kilowatt hour or thereabouts, and the same tariff was used up in Scotland when I used the 3-pin socket, the total would come to just a smidge over £222. In terms of the charging time, I spent about 575 minutes at DC rapid charging stations, so that's about 9.5 hours. However, if we account for the slow AC charging time as well, the total value is almost 28 hours. Now, I can already see what some of you are thinking, and that's that if you completed the same journey in a diesel vehicle, it would only take you 15-20 minutes to refuel in total. However, the whole way of using and refueling an EV is a bit different, so let's take a step back and let's look at the numbers again. Almost 28 hours of charging time. However, the only actual time I had to wait for the car to charge, meaning I was sitting in it doing nothing, were the top-up charges just before I got to Glasgow to make sure that I had enough charge to drive around Glasgow, which totaled around 90 minutes. Now, that sounds much more reasonable, and had there been an opportunity to plug in while I was staying in Glasgow at a slow AC charger while the car was parked, I would have not needed to spend any extra time charging. To put it a little bit differently, even if we assume that the car is only parked at night for 10 hours at a time, given there were 7 nights in the trip, that's 70 hours. And 70 hours is plenty of time to recharge an EV. The majority of the time was wasted by the car doing nothing, whereas it could have been plugged in had there been sufficient infrastructure. Which brings me on to the final remarks of the trip. Costs-wise, the 484 kilowatt hours came to about £205. The number is a bit lower than the 222 figure because I had quite a bit of energy left over when I arrived, so definitely did not need to charge at the last instable charging stop as much as I did. That means that if I wanted to complete the same trip with an equivalent diesel car, it would need to average about 54 miles per gallon, based on the current price of diesel, which is about £1.80p per litre. I have to make a disclaimer that since I made the trip, some electricity providers have increased their prices, but then again, we've got the government support coming in. So as always, it's best to recalculate the figure based on your particular circumstances and how you plan to use the vehicle. And I know your 2-litre Passat can maybe match that or even exceed that at 60, 65, 70 miles per gallon, but good luck trying to find a 400 horsepower all-wheel drive SUV which can get anywhere close to that figure in the real world, especially if you're enjoying the performance it has to offer, like I was doing with the I-PACE in the Scottish Highlands. A little fun fact on the side is that if we forget the whole economic side of things and just want to look at pure energy efficiency, the 484 kilowatt hours are roughly equal to 48 litres of diesel. So despite the I-PACE not being a particularly efficient EV, it still averaged about 129 miles per gallon equivalent of a diesel vehicle, which really just shows you how much more efficient electric motors are at propelling a vehicle compared to a combustion engine. Lastly, as I mentioned before, the whole charging stop situation would look a whole lot different had there been destination charging along the way. And I think this is where we need to focus with EVs and EV infrastructure going forward. It's all well and good that we are building all of these rapid charging stations, and it's very exciting because the boundaries are really being pushed in terms of how much power they can deliver, with the newest ones going up to 350, almost 400 kilowatts. But it's having a simple Type 2 wall box or even a robust 3-pin socket available at your destination, which would really eliminate the need for a lot of charging stops along the way, freeing up capacity on those units for drivers who actually need them, whilst being indefinitely cheaper to implement by small business owners or homeowners. And I think that's about it. Thank you very much for watching. Let us know in the comments whether you have done something similar. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and see you in the next one.